Okay, welcome to the webinar. We will be starting shortly. Wetlands Application 101. Patty Cluelow and Chris Squazzo will guide you through the wetlands permit application process, address your questions, and share practical tips for navigating NJDEP regulations. There are a few more folks joining us, so I'm going to make sure that we allow them to be here. And I'm going to take down the webinar slide that's here. That's the only slide you will see today. So thank you and welcome. Okay, so we have got a full house here. I'm going to just mention the ground rules and we'll get started again. My name is Faraz Khan. Thank you again for joining us. Please remain muted unless called upon to speak to ensure a smooth and focused session. We do have around 200 people here who signed up for this session or for this webinar, and we received your questions. So we would go through a set of these questions that we have received already, and then allow for some more questions if the time permits. Our speakers will introduce themselves before their presentations. There actually is no presentation or slides here. They will be simply responding to their questions, but I would like them to speak and just introduce their topic. This outreach webinar is a team effort, so I would like to remind you of that. Special thanks to Harley Zaraza and Kiona Miller for leading our email and social media campaign, and to Sue Lockwood, Jessica Cobb, Jason Kane, and our Assistant Commissioner, Jennifer Moriarty, for their guidance and support. At this point, we have our speakers, both Chris Squazzo, over 20 years of experience in land use regulation and specifically with wetlands, and also Patty Cluelow, who has been with us for quite a while. At this very young age, they have about 50 years or so experience, which we really appreciate their expertise and policy, rules, rulemaking. They have seen it all. So I appreciate their good work. So at this point, I'm going to ask Patty Cluelow to be with us. And I'm going to ask her to just briefly talk to us about the application process, e-submission, just an intro. People have asked a few questions on that regard. Patty, if you could just introduce yourself and then just give a brief intro, and then I'll go into the questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patty Cluelow. I have been, as Faraz says, with the department quite a while, approximately 35 years. I started when I was 12, really 23, but we'll skip that. I've been a supervisor since 2011. I was the supervisor of the Application Support Unit, and now I'm a supervisor in the Bureau of Program Development and Technology, which means basically I am a rule writer. And I write legislation. I'm also part of the group that does the permitting and our database systems. So I have a little bit of all of that. Now, Faraz, did you want me to introduce what e-permitting is? Is that what you wanted? Okay. Approximately 5 years ago, DEP, WLM started requiring that all applications that came through the door, with just a few minor exceptions, be processed online. We have what's called an e-portal, electronic portal. And that's where the applications go through, with the exception of letters of interpretation, which have their own, which is separate, required to submit a letter of interpretation. But from what I'm gathering, most people are switching to the portal system, and it saves a lot of paper. So the only things that really can't be submitted through the e-portal system are smaller things, such as your applicability determinations, Zane exemptions, any other kind of exemptions, and like I said, some other small items. I'm sorry?
Modifications too.
Oh, modifications and standalone flood hazard verifications. We're working at some point to make those available online, but at this point, we're still not in that process yet. Okay, so would you like to start with the questions for us?
Sure. Thank you for that intro, Patty. Really appreciate it. So we have some questions here, and the first one is from Sandra Skarodowski, and she mentioned about review of the electronic submittal requirements. And she's also asking, does the LOI submittal need to be separate from other application submittals? So if Chris, you need to jump into this one too, please feel free to do so.
Okay. As I said prior, the e-portal system was developed before the e-portal for Watershed and Land Use Management electric submittal services. The two services are not currently compatible with one another. Okay, the two services are not currently compatible with one another. So right now, LOIs need to be submitted separately. However, it's likely in the future that the services for ELOI and permitting may be linked, or ELOIs may be folded into the permitting portal. E-submission of permit applications requires the same basic elements that paper submittals required, and they all are uploaded into the system either in PDF form or in Excel spreadsheets are available, Word is available, and a few other methods. When you log into the ePortal system, you will have to provide your applicant information, location information, the type of permits that you're requesting, property owner certifications, proof of notice, a compliance statement if required, electronically stamped and sealed project plans, and any supporting materials that are specific to the permit type. We have checklists, information, and directions available on our website. Some tips for submitting a complete application: do your homework. Review the checklists, gather all your information prior to going into the portal, and submit everything required. More info is better than too little.
Thank you, Patty.
I hope that answers your question, Sandra.
And this is coming from Tracy Buckley. She's asking, does DEP consult with local municipal officials in terms of application process too? And during their LOI review process, does DEP take comments from ECs during their review process?
As part of the review process of every application, you are required to notify the municipalities and give notice. And if there's an environmental commission, you're also supposed to give notice to them as well. They are more than welcome to provide their comments on any project that comes through our door. As anybody else that you've noticed, and the town or anybody else that has a vested interest in the project. What's the rest of the question?
Sure. So does DEP consult with local municipal officials? That was answered. And does the DEP take comments from the EC during their review process? I believe you you answered both of them.
I answered that as well.
Okay. Here is a question
Can I add
in
to
regards.
that question? Can I add for us? Can I add to that?
Sure, Chris.
Yeah,
Definitely. Yes.
Yeah, just wanted to add to what Patty was saying, folks, from a sort of review process perspective. Obviously, Patty answered that you guys, anybody can submit a comment letter, whether it be an EC, an individual resident, et cetera, et cetera. But we certainly take them into consideration. We read them. We upload them. Nowadays, we upload them, scan them, upload them, put them in the file. Back in the day, we would just put them in the file. But the bottom line is, if even though they're considered and we can understand some people's concerns, if an application or a project meets the rules, then it will be granted, regardless of somebody who might not be happy with the project. Again, just want to make it clear that while things will be considered, we might look at something that was brought up, et cetera. But if it ultimately meets the letter of the law, meets the rule, the project will be approved.
Thank you so much, Chris, for clarifying. This might be, again, pertaining to both of you, so I'll give Patty a chance first. Karen Haney is asking, which department or division regulates the various types of wetlands? And who and how do we contact someone for questions regarding the permits and if they are required?
Okay, there are basically three main types of permits. Wetlands. There's freshwater wetlands, there are coastal mapped wetlands, and then there are coastal unmapped wetlands. Your freshwater wetlands are regulated by the Wetland and Highland Permitting Bureau. It's the Bureau of Freshwater Wetlands and Highland Permitting Bureau. And we will provide their information for you, and it is also available on our website. Coastal wetlands that are regulated pursuant to the Wetlands Act of 1970 are live with the Bureau of Coastal Permitting. And again, we will give you the contact information, and it's on our website. The manager there is Janet Stewart. Now, the third type of wetlands, unmapped coastal wetlands, and someone else has this question, so I'll touch on it right now. If your wetlands are coastal, which is tidally influenced, and you were not mapped and you are not on a promulgated map, those wetlands are regulated via the Freshwater Wetlands Protection Act, not via the Coastal Wetlands of 1970. If you believe strongly that your wetlands should have been mapped, there is a very long and complicated process to have the line changed. It's basically a rule process. It has to be put into the register. People are allowed to comment on it, and then it has to be adopted. So that's that stance. Our website is very, very inclusive and gives a lot of details, and it is www.dep.nj.gov/WLM/. There's also township assignments for the different project managers there. We have a general information number, which is 609-777-0454. And for status of applications, you can go to the New Jersey.gov/DEP website and go to Data Miner, and you can put in your information and get your status as well.
Yeah, Patty, on the contact information and the website, we will type the address in the chat. So I'm going to ask if Kevin could you please do that? Just provide the wetlands contact information and also the wetlands page, WLM, Watershed and Land Management website page. That would be helpful. So that's where you would find coastal wetlands, mapped wetlands, and freshwater wetlands information on the website. Chris, would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, actually, you read my mind, Faraz. I would. And Patty, correct me if I get this distance wrong. You folks, you can also have a site where you'll have promulgated coastal wetlands on a property, and then also freshwater wetlands on the same property. And as long as they're greater than 15 feet, I believe, Patty, is it 10 or 15 or 12?
10 to 15, I forget which it is.
I apologize, everybody. I believe, but I think it's 15 feet. Let's say you have like a big Timber Creek down in South Jersey, and you have mapped coastal promulgated wetlands on there, and that line is established on the maps, and you take that mapping and you put it onto your existing survey. If you find wetlands that are 15 feet or greater away from that promulgated line, they will be considered freshwater wetlands. So just kind of wanted to point out a little nuance.
And that
Yeah,
is
go ahead, Patty.
based on the fact of the width of the line on the map. So, I mean, we account for the fact that the line on the map has a certain width. So.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, for that information that you put in the chat. And thank you, Patty and Chris, on that one. Last question for you, Patty. I know you do have some other commitments as well, and you were able to make time for us. But last question for you here, direct question. Are applications by municipalities fast-tracked? This is a question from Ben Stoneman.
Okay, the short answer is no. Applications are usually reviewed based on their completeness and deadlines when there is a required deadline. If there is imminent risk to health, safety, or welfare to the citizens of New Jersey, it can issue an emergency permit for work to begin. However, this is contingent upon receiving the required permit from the department. Applicants are given a set amount of time to submit the full application to the department. And there are a lot of times where municipal entities will do this because of a road washing out, a bulkhead getting washed out, or any type of flooding event and that kind of thing, where it needs immediate repair and can't wait for the permitting process to take place.
Okay, so that, and same thing goes with county and other municipal governments, right?
Absolutely.
So no fast track. Okay, thank you so much. Let me ask, in addition, you talked about emergency permits, and which is obviously you laid out some of these scenarios. Chris, do you want to talk about like those trees and the streams and all these other things, the requests that municipalities, and there are a lot of folks from various townships who are listening. What is the process? Let's say if there is a storm, a few trees have fallen into a stream or wetland, and there are issues. How do we usually handle those questions?
Sure. There's quite a few different scenarios out there, but I guess the most common one would be exactly what Faraz just laid out. Folks, if you're a municipality and you're the DPW superintendent and you have a couple trees that fall down and are clogging up a stream and creating flooding, it's not even a regulated activity. If you can get in there, one man, one shovel, one chainsaw, and get in there and free up the blockage, that's not an issue. You can go ahead and do it, as soon as you possibly can. The issue becomes when you have to maybe start cutting down some serious vegetation to access some of these areas. That's when we would want a permit. But having said that, if you still need it, if you had an emergency situation and for access to these areas, you could still go in there and do it under an emergency authorization, like Patty had pointed out, which you would simply contact us at the DEP office and reach out to myself, Rebecca Greik, or Ryan Anderson, I'm an ES4, Rebecca's an ES4, and Ryan's the manager, and we would process an emergency authorization right away for somebody to go ahead and clear out the stream. And then you'd have to follow back up and legalize and permit the disturbances you needed for access. Again, if you didn't need to do any type of disturbance for access and it was easy to get to and you could get in there and get out of there, go ahead, free up the log jam, get it flowing again, and it's really not really a regulated activity.
Thank you again, Chris. That was wonderful, very helpful. Let me look into the next set of questions first. And I know, Patty, you sent me a message. I'll respond to that one too. So this one is about, this is the one from Amanda Bergeson, and she's asking any updates or changes to the pre-existing wetlands application process. And if Patty, if you want to comment on that one too, that would be good.
Currently, there is a proposal that was proposed on August 5th of this year, 2025. And that proposal is referred to as NJPACT REAL, REAL. In that proposal, which is not yet adopted, there are some changes to the freshwater wetlands and all permitting types. But the changes to freshwater wetlands are fairly minor compared to what's going to happen with the Flood Hazard Area Control Act and with the CZM rules. I think it's just a few different, very small requirements, nothing much, because there weren't very many tweaks we could make under that rule.
Thank you, Patty. Patty, do you want to take a look at some of the other additional comments or notes or questions that people have asked that you may have, or you want to respond to any additional comments?
Well, go ahead. Which ones were you had assigned certain ones to me?
Yes. So I've gone through the highlighted ones, and there were a few ones that I felt that you have already answered. So I didn't ask those questions, and there were maybe a couple more that I believe they were more for Chris and wetlands related. So that's why I didn't ask those questions.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, great.
I'm good.
All right. Would you like to
I am
stay
going to
on?
put.
Okay, go ahead.
I will stay on as long as I can. I will put my email address into the chat. So if anybody has any additional questions, they're more than welcome to answer me. Ask me. I am also available if you have any questions regarding the interplay of the different rules with the Freshwater Wetlands Protection Act. So call me out or email me. So
Great.
go ahead. I'm going to mute.
Thank you again, Patty. Okay. Chris, so this one is from Deborah Dilks. She's asking, who should apply for a permit? Who is responsible to inform those required to get a permit?
Well, the applicant, you doesn't the owner of a property does not have to necessarily be the applicant. We have many so it's twofold question there. The second part of the question, whoever's responsible to notify the public, it's the applicant. It's the applicant via the application submittal process, the 200-foot property owner list, the newspaper article, etc. Some of the things Patty touched upon in the checklist. Now, it depends on the scenario of what's going on a project. There's several times it's a single family property owner, and they're the owner and the applicant. They could also be somebody that owns a big business, or or somebody that owns a big piece of property they want to develop. They could be one and the same. But you could, many times though, however, where somebody else owns the property and somebody else comes in as a prospective buyer and wants to develop it for whatever reason they may or may not want to do, they would come in as sort of co-applicants or no, they would come in jointly, but the one would be considered the applicant on the LERP form, and the other would have to sign off as owner. Now, for most of you folks, I don't know if LERP form's the old school term for when we were land use resource protection, or what were we, Patty? Land use resource program. Our names have changed so many times I can't keep it straight anymore.
Land
yeah,
use.
That's old school.
Land resource protection.
Yeah. So now we call them the LRP forms, and basically it's just what Patty was talking about on the checklist. It's a legal form. It's a legal document. That's why it has to be notarized, and there's signatures on it. It's a legal document saying, "Hey, DEP, you're allowed on this property. You're allowed to come on my property and inspect it." Also, it's saying, "Hey, DEP, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, as a consultant here, are representing us. They're your agents." It's also saying, "Hey, DEP, Mr. or Mrs. Smith are the applicant, and hey, DEP, Mr. and Mrs. Khan are the owners." So it just depends on the scenario. They're not. It doesn't have to be one or the other. The agent's representing, most of the times representing the applicant and or the owner, and the owner and the applicant can be different.
Thank you, Chris. That was great. And I want to, again, this is a question that's not directly related to Wetlands 101 application process, but I will, put it out there. So this is coming from, I believe, Zeska Mulkerin. Sorry about the pronunciation or mispronunciation. What's the New Jersey administration's take on the connection between wetlands and climate? I believe climate change is referred here. How do we help our communities to understand how wetlands cool the environment and restore the water cycle? That is a question. And any statistics on the environmental literacy, wetlands and plant literacy at New Jersey schools? So I just give a buzzword here, NJPACT, and I'll let, if Patty wants to talk on this one first, and then Chris. Yes.
Okay. There are many functions of freshwater wetlands. They include water quality protection, place for wildlife habitat, protection from flooding due to the moderation of stream levels and base flows, and wetlands store carbon, also known as carbon sequestration. I can barely pronounce that, but we'll go with it. Binding the carbon and making it unavailable to become carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So basically, the more wetlands you have, the less carbon dioxide you have. As you know, New Jersey is experiencing longer periods of drought and more frequent and intense precipitation events, which are projected to occur 2 to 5 times more often and with more intensity than in the last century. This will have detrimental impacts on freshwater wetland systems. Degradation of wetlands results in the diminishment or loss of the function that wetlands provides. So basically, wetlands serve a very important role when it comes to climate and climate change and flooding resiliency. They help with flood prevention. They help with the carbon dioxide, like I said. And for the most part, they help with water quality as well. So that's the important functions. I really don't have any statistics regarding environmental literacy, but however, since climate change is in the forefront really right now, the more children hear about wetlands, water quality, et cetera, the more interested likely to ask about them in school. The schools do have some projects of it, the schools do have some programs available to them, such as Project Wet, and there are other school programs available to them. They can also participate in municipal government commissions and green teams, such as like rain barrel events and things that need in any environmental day and Earth Day events. Really get them interested in the environmental awareness. Did that answer the questions okay? Okay.
Chris, do you want to talk about NJPACT really, real fast on that one, or that's good enough? Okay.
Yeah, not really. I think Patty summed it up real well.
Okay. If you would like to, I just wanted to show you this book. This is on Project Wet, which Patty just talked about, and this is for curriculum for teachers, curriculum and activity guide 2.0. There is a this is a thick version. There's a latest version that's actually let me just bring it over. Foundations of Water Education for Educators. This is one of those guides that you could utilize some of these activities with students. I believe elementary, middle school could benefit. Even high schoolers could benefit from some of these resources. So just a reference point. I want to go to the next question, and this is from a series of questions, I guess, but very interesting questions. And you could see where Richard Cohn is going with these questions. So he asked, and Chris, this one's for you, what are permissible uses near possible wetland fringe? And then he's asking, could a stormwater detention basin be built to prevent stormwater runoff downstream, okay, near the wetland? So I'll ask these two questions first, again, wetland fringe and a stormwater detention basin, and then I'll mention what else he has, an example.
Well, okay. Yeah, I appreciate that because I want to be because one at a time. I'm a simpleton, everybody. As far as uses are concerned, I mean, that's really a tough question to answer, sir, because it just depends on what the proposed activity is. Basically, the generic answer is anything you're proposing within proximity of wetlands is likely going to need some sort of a permit, no matter what the activity is. And maybe I should backtrack for, because some of you folks may not know this. All wetlands have buffers, and they're called transition areas. So they range from 0 to 50 to 150, depending on what's known as the resource classification of these wetlands. So I guess if you had what's known as a common wetlands drainage ditch that does not drain to trout production waters, it will be considered ordinary value, would not have a transition area, would not have a buffer. So, sir, something like that, you could get up right to the edge of the wetland and do whatever activity you needed to do. We would not consider that regulated from a freshwater wetlands perspective. But the majority of wetlands.
Chris, do you want to? Chris, do you want to talk about what examples are? Wetlands with no buffer, so people are clear on this one.
Sure. Yeah, we could. Some of the classic examples are wetland drainage swales and wetland drainage ditches, and the swales and ditches are different in the sense that swale typically does not have a real defined bed and bank. It's not usually linear. It's a little more meandering, and is not considered a stay-up water because it doesn't have base flow and typically is ephemeral and typically an ephemeral type feature. Wetland ditch, it has all three parameters: vegetation, soils, and hydrology. It's surrounded by uplands. It's linear in nature. It's man-made. Swales can be natural, and ditches are man-made. They're all ordinary value, both of them. However, if they drain to trout production waters, they will be considered exceptional. And it doesn't matter how far down the line it takes. To go on a little bit of a tangent here. I want to educate you all. There's a case called the Obstler case, Obstler, Obstler. It was a property up in Kinnelon, New Jersey, Morris County, and they had wetlands that drained down into Route 23. That wetland, Route 23 up there drains into the Paquonic River. The Paquonic River's trout production. So we called him out as exceptional. Mr. Obstler didn't agree with that finding, so he challenged it and went to the courts, and the courts found that it didn't matter if wetlands are tributary to trout production waters, no matter how far away, and no matter if it goes into artificial or natural connection, it's still going to be considered exceptional. So that's case law. That's precedent. It's really important. So again, those are the only two scenarios where a ditch or a swale would be considered exceptional. A couple other ordinary value wetlands, your classic detention basins, especially the ones that are created in uplands. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be considered ordinary. It's rare that they're not. There is a scenario if you have a detention basin out in the forest, and it's forested habitat and there's bad habitat utilizing it. I have seen them come back as another call, but most of the times, 9 times out of 10, probably 9.5 times out of 10, a detention basin is ordinary. And lastly, is an ordinary value. Another last scenario of an ordinary value wetland would be an isolated pocket wetland, less than 5,000 square feet in size, and greater than 50% development around it. Now, again, the key components there are 3 things: isolated, less than 5,000 square feet in size, and greater than 50% development around it. What does greater than 50% development around it mean? Well, what that means is you can't have, it would not be considered degraded or downgraded if it was like lawn on one side, anything like that nature. It would have to be like parking lot, building structure, uh, something of that nature, gravel road, something like that. So if you have that scenario with those three characteristics line up, that wetland would be considered ordinary. So that's the ordinary thing for us. Now, get me back into where I was answering another gentleman's question, though.
Yeah, so
Follow up on
you've
that.
talked about ordinary, I think, and Ellie, who's here, who's asked Esparza, has asked about the same man-made stormwater basin built. You answered that question as well, so that was a wonderful response on stormwater basin and wetlands, man-made stuff. Let's get back to, so you talked about ordinary. What's intermediate, and what makes a 150-foot buffer exceptional resource value wetlands? Because we're talking about the buffers, and it's important for folks to know that wetlands have transition areas, aka buffers. So go ahead.
Yeah, roger that. So basically, I'll go with exceptional. It's one of two issues. Either it's documented habitat for threatened and/or endangered species, which is based on Landscape 3.4 now, and or the species there, or its habitat. It can be one and or the other. And if it drains to trout production waters. Again, same thing I laid out with the ditch and the swale scenario. Like that Opsler case, they were freshwater wetlands, forested, PFO ones, forested, palustrin broadleaf deciduous forest. They drained down into the Route 23 stormwater system and drained out to the Pequannock River. So if any of these wetlands drain to trout waters, doesn't matter about the Huck 14, doesn't matter if it's 8 miles away. If it's down the line and it drains to that waterway, drains to those waters, it will be considered exceptional. Now, intermediate, it's everything else in between. If it's not ordinary and it's not exceptional, it'll be intermediate. And I'd say probably, I don't know, 70% of the wetlands in the state are intermediate. There's more intermediate wetlands than exceptional and ordinary. So then the one last question that that gentleman had, I remember, he said about what to do near wetlands adjacent to them, and we just talked about the buffers.
Yeah,
Now
and
he mentioned something about basin in line.
Yeah, could a stormwater detention basin be built to prevent stormwater runoff downstream? So he's asking, again, with the wetland fringe, could a stormwater detention basin be built?
Absolutely. I mean, we call them rain gardens. Usually, they're man-made, or I'll say human-made, detention basin, for lack of a better term. But that's a classic rain garden. Now, again, you'll have to find out the scenario of the particular wetland system that you'd want to construct something like this. But even if it was an exceptional value wetland, let's say you had, an area that was legally existing concrete, legally existing mowed lawn, legally existing gravel. Those are a scenario, and then it's an exceptional wetland, and you're in the TA of that. We would certainly, with permits, allow you to construct something like that to help with flood attenuation and water quality. Now, we wouldn't let you cut down a forested transition area to put something in like that, because that would defeat the purpose of the forest, because you're not going to emulate what Mother Nature does. So it really, that question's a good question, but there's a lot of moving parts to it. And, so those are some of the best scenarios that I can think of off the top of my head to hopefully answer it.
Yes. And folks, again, wetland rules, that's where the clarifications and all the details are. We're simply giving you guidance based on these questions. Again, there will be many different aspects of the questions that you're asking. Is it a forested area? Is it a scrub shrub? Is it, you got gravel? Roadway surrounded by parking lot. So these are some of the scenarios that come into play, and it gets a little complex, yes, and that's why you're asking, and we're trying to respond to these questions. The question that was you've answered some of it. Can a drainage ditch, this is the same person, Richard Cohn, can a drainage ditch that runs through a wetland ditch be maintained? And what he means by that is leaves and other debris removed to prevent backup and flooding of adjacent roadways, driveways, and basements.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Sometimes with and sometimes without a permit. Depends on the the extent of what you're trying to clear out. Again, I when I first got to the department 22 years ago, over 20 years ago, my supervisor at the time always used to, he was a pretty eccentric guy. He'd always be like, one man, one wheelbarrow, one shovel is not really regulated. So let's say, sir, you had a drainage ditch in front of your house and you have a culvert going underneath your road. Excuse me, your access driveway, and that culvert's all clogged up with leaf debris, and sticks, et cetera, et cetera. Sir, you could get down in there and just rooter that right on out yourself with a shovel and have clear passage right on through and make sure that you have positive drainage. Now, if you had to get in there and actually start removing, again, I'm trying to think of scenarios. It depends on the extent of the disturbance. If it was something that was clogged up or had to be fixed, cleared out, and you had to cut down trees to access it, meaning like forest, jurisdictional trees, jurisdictional areas, vegetation. If you had to come in there and actually regrade some of this stuff and get in there with an excavator, those sorts of things would all be approvable as well, but that would require a review from the department. We would, and likely it would be just a freshwater wetlands general permit number 1, which is, maintenance of a legally existing, man-made structure, and a wetland drainage ditch would be probably something that would fall into that. So those are a couple of scenarios I can think of off the top of my head. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay. There are several folks asking about, again, what's the time span for a letter of interpretation, LOI? How long does it last? And how long do these general permits that we issue, the permits that we issue here, what's the time limit on it? And what if the wetlands expand or shrink? Do they expand or shrink, and how much is it, we're talking about?
All right. Let's go question 2, because that's easy. Both wetland permits and LOIs, once approved or authorized, have a 5-year shelf life, with the opportunity to get them extended one time each for 10 years. Now, to get into that third part of that question, wetlands are dynamic systems. Some will change over 5 years. Many don't. Typically, streams are more dynamic than a wetland, because they're more susceptible to flash flooding and erosional, characteristics from stormwater and extreme rain events. So, I like to call wetlands associated with streams floodplain wetlands. So those tend to change more than like a very large wetland complex that's been sort of like in equilibrium for a long, long, long time. That would be more of a gentle, slighter change. But having said that, when somebody comes in for an extension, we do 2 things. We do a quick cursory overview of the property, make sure something like that, like I mentioned, hasn't changed. We don't review it the way we review the first time an LOI comes in, where we really look at the whole property with a fine-tooth comb. An extension, we kind of spot check it. Number 2, every once in a while, the Fish and Wildlife folks work with our T&E unit, and they have what's known as a landscape program, landscape mapping. Landscape mapping, I think, started off as, I guess, I don't know how many years ago, 15 years. It's been around a long time, but the newer version of 3.1 came out maybe 15 so years ago. And then we had 3.3, and now we have 3.4. So every so often, 6-7 years-ish, they regather information and they pull some species in, pull some species out. So those kinds of things are what we would look at to see if there was any changes in the landscape mapping during the time of that 5 years. If not, then it won't get another review. If yes, and it might be a hit for a species that's now considered critical, or we found that it's there because there was a sighting, then it will get a review and could do an upgrade of resource classification. I've also seen it go down, so it depends on the scenario. But and what was the first part of that question? Because I answered 2 and 3, but the first one was, if you don't mind, for us. You're
I
on
believe
mute.
I believe you've answered these questions. So it
What
was
was the
about the
first part? 'Cause I had
timing,
a thought on it.
the
Oh, yeah.
wetlands,
Okay.
general
Yep,
permits,
timing.
LOIs. Yeah,
But I
timing.
wanted to talk. I thought maybe the question might have been like, how long is it for to get one out the door? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it really helps that you guys get the lines right, and it's not grossly deficient or inaccurate. That helps bluntly. But it also helps here when we're running on all
And who's getting
cylinders.
the line right, Chris? Here,
Oh,
so public is aware.
whoever who would be the environmental consultant, wetland scientist who's delineating the line out in the field.
Got it.
So as far as time frame is concerned, I mean, right now we're back to about 6 to 9 months, which is where we want to be. It ebbs and flows depending on workloads here and staffing bluntly. And a couple of years ago, we had an onslaught of flood hazard applications because the new rules were coming in and people were freaking out because they thought that they wanted to get their projects in prior to the new rule because they felt like the new rule was going to, really inhibit them. So when things like that happen, we kind of have to deal with that first because it has 90-day clocks, and that's a sort of a necessary evil. And in staffing, unfortunately, with the department ebbs and flows. And if we don't have the people to do the work, sometimes it takes longer. And there was a while there where LOIs were taking 15 months, and we weren't happy about it. But as a team, we addressed it. We knew it was an issue, and we're working hard to get them done a lot sooner. Now, the bureaucratic answer is that legally we have up to, there's no really legal time frame for an LOI. But, sometimes you have to see a site different times a year because a site looks different times a year. Field work in late August and early September, and I'd say late July through early September is terrible. Vegetation's full. It's usually dry. You're not seeing much, hydrologic connections. It's tough to get into some of the sites. So and then obviously in the middle of the winter, if we have a rough winter, which we don't have that often anymore in New Jersey, but every once in a while we do, there'll be a few weeks or maybe up to a month where we're either frozen out or there's so much snow and drifting snow, you really can't pick up any micro delineation or micro topography out there. And it's tough to really tell what's going on a site. And we need to let things sort of settle, fall out a little bit and start to melt. So, right now, again, we're under a year to get an LOI done for the newer ones that have come in, and we're running on all cylinders now, and we're getting that time frame down significantly. But any of you consultants out there, you need to tell your clients, hey, listen, the department right now is about 9 months out from an LOI, and so that way their expectations will be set immediately. Instead, don't tell them that they're going to get it in a couple of months because they're not. So it would really help us to make sure that you talk to your clients about that.
That was a great amount of detail. Thank you, Chris, on this one. I believe folks would have a better understanding of the process and time, both the permit, how long it's good for, which is 5 years, and also, the process itself, how long, and you should be able to plan accordingly. So given the time frame that we have. Chris, do you want to, at this point, I'm going to ask the public, the audience who are here, a couple of questions. Do you want to get some water or something like that and join us in a couple of minutes, or are you good? I'll leave it at.
Let's keep rolling, buddy. But just do me a favor. All I can see is you and Patty's little thing here. So any questions come in, please read them to me.
Sure. We're looking at the chat as well, and Patty's monitoring the chat. Yeah. Okay. It's okay. You don't have to look at that. You could focus on the questions that I'm asking because Patty's also responding to it, and I'm reading it as well. So you're doing a great job, which is cool. Thanks, appreciated. Patty. For the folks who are out there, I'm going to ask you a question that relates to our future webinars. I hope you're enjoying this webinar and getting your questions answered. What recent or upcoming regulatory changes would you like to learn more about in future webinars such as these? So I'm going to put this question out there and let us know. This way we'll get an understanding. Perhaps, there's another webinar we're organizing for in the next couple of months, maybe perhaps, and we'll get an understanding of where we need to focus. Okay. So take a look at that question, respond, and I'm going to continue to pose your questions that you have submitted here to Chris Squazzo. So the question here from Andrew Eusadis, I believe, he's asking, again, this is about timing stuff. How long does a typical wetland line delineation LOI take?
To review it? That
No,
well,
I believe for the application. Yeah.
Well, like I said,
Your experience from the consulting business in the previous era.
Well, yeah, there was a time, folks, that I worked 4 years for a consulting firm before I came here. So any consultants out there, I've walked a mile or two in your moccasins. And then I joined the department. I guess I never did give you sort of my background. I started in graduated Stockton in '99, Bachelor of Science in Environmental Sciences with a minor in biology. I worked at a engineering firm down in South Jersey for 4 years. I ran their wetlands department. And then the department was dumb enough to hire me in January of 2004. And I've been here ever since. So, as far as, taking how long does an LOI take? Again, I gave you the whole spiel about when we can get to them. It depends on how accurate the line is, and also how large the site is, and the accessibility to it. So it really ranges. Sometimes you're in somebody's backyard, or properties, real small. You can knock them out right, within a half an hour, 45 minutes of us being, out there in the field. Now, let me tell you, delineating wetland is harder than checking them. Again, I've been on both sides of the aisle. It takes a lot longer to delineate than it does to check them, and there's more to do with that data point. You guys are doing data points all the time. You're trying to do, oh gosh, what's the term?
Soil borings and
yeah, not the soil borings, brother, but like when you're doing transection, you transect the property to make sure you're not missing anything. So there's a lot more to it. Reviewing it is a little easier. However, we still do data points to prove if we agree with you that it's an upland, we do a data point, be like, yep, this is an upland, and we put that in our field notes. And then if it's an area that we don't agree with you and we want to expand a wetland line, we're going to put our data point there, and we're going to tell you why we're expanding it here. And then also, folks, believe it or not, we do decrease sometimes. If somebody's got a wetland line and they're off 10 feet one way or the other, typically we're not going to lose too much sleep over unless it's just too darn aggressive. We may say, hey, pull it back a topographical grade. Conversely, if it's, a few feet, you gave us a little bit of upland. If it's less, if it's not that significant, we'll just leave it, let it lie. But, I was out on a site just recently where they delineated the wetland, and it was easily almost 100 feet away from where the actual wetlands were. And we will not, we will change that line. We will decrease the amount of wetlands on the property, because at that point we're fact finders. It's science. We're out there to get the jurisdictional line in the sand the right way. So that goes both ways. Now, it does also, like I mentioned earlier, it behooves the consultant to know what they're doing. And the better the line, the quicker the process. So, when we're out there and we're doing data point after data point, and the lines sometimes are just atrocious, that's wasting a lot of time. Sometimes we'll get to a point where we'll just circle a whole area and be like, you need to reevaluate this. If it's some minor changes, we can just do some nips and tucks here and there. That we can just send it to a consultant. They can make the changes. It doesn't have to be resurveyed. We can get it back in and get it out the door. So really, the question is, to answer that question, it really depends on the quality of the application, time of year, and the size of the property and the complexity of the wetland configuration itself.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And you answered the question about timing, and from the perspective of application, the homeowner perhaps, or the property owner, and when they have a wetland line delineated by a consultant, and then what it takes, and then we review it, and what is our review process. Obviously, when you are delineating a wetland line, it takes a lot more effort than simply reviewing a wetland line. And I may just want to add that we do go out there and we review them on site. So the DEP staff is out there reviewing it. You know, there's no like aerial photography or anything like that, drones that we send out. So we have to send out folks, you know, who go out there with
boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground. That is needed, and that's how you have a official letter of interpretation, wetland line, when we review it. This next one is from Matthew D. Simon. He's asking, how do the freshwater wetland rules and stormwater management rules relate? So stormwater and wetland rules.
Well, they're sisters. You know, they're cousins, so to speak. If you have an activity that triggers the stormwater review within our division, whether it be like an FHA, I mean, I don't want to get into FHA stuff, but I will just touch on a smidge. If you're an FHA jurisdiction, the whole site is within jurisdiction, and then all stormwater is going to be reviewed. With freshwater wetlands, originally it was just quarter acre of disturbance on a project. It didn't, but then because of shortages we had here and some cuts we had to make it's been about 14 years ago, they started doing quarter acre mean new impervious, acre of new disturbance within our jurisdiction. So that sort of took away some of the stormwater review that happened here at the state, but still was supposed to happen at the local level. In theory, let's hope that happened. And or a direct discharge, whether it be an outfall structure via GP11, an outfall structure via an averaging plan. Anytime you have some sort of point source discharge, you're going to have to deal with stormwater and the wetland permitting, because you're discharging either to a TA or to a wetland complex or water for that matter. I had another thought on that. There's also kind of some weird scenarios. Let's say you have an existing condition, large parking lot that everything sheet flows off and just there's no curbing. It just goes in different directions. And let's say now your new project and you're taking that parking lot and you're curbing it and shooting your stormwater to one point source. You have to calculate that square area of impervious, pre-existing impervious, and now count it. And if that is over a quarter acre, you're definitely going to have to deal with stormwater. Now, as I understand it, somebody had asked earlier some of the nuanced changes in the freshwater rules with the new upgrading of the upgrading of all the rules and regs out there with NJ Real. I believe that the quarter acre within jurisdiction threshold's going away, and it's going to go back to just quarter acre of new impervious or acre of new disturbance on a project site. It's going to require the stormwater review. And if it's something that has to come into us, we will be reviewing it here at the state. If it's something that does not come into us, it will be reviewed at the local level.
Thank you on that one. So again, we were talking about stormwater rules and freshwater wetland rules and the connection between the two. Stormwater management rules, yes. Let's go to the next one. And this is specific from a question about the certain permits. Kathleen Woolley, I believe that's her last name, is asking, when do I need an LOI if I'm getting a general permit number 4, number 12, or number 14? What is the process and approval timeframe for a general permit modification? I could repeat that question if you'd need to. But
I think I got it. It's
okay.
The mod part. All right, the mod part. We'd like to get them out as soon as possible. Mods are brutal because, bluntly, and to be honest with you, it depends on workload here and staffing. Sometimes mods take a back seat, because the engineers are swamped, pun intended, with flood hazard 90-day deadlines and stormwater reviews. So sometimes mods take for a while, and you really need to be a squeaky wheel when they come in. There's no time frame on them, and the answer is we try to get them out as fast as we can. The first part of the question, though, was what again for us? I'm sorry.
So there's specific general permits. So she's asking,
Right,
when do I need an LOI? I'm getting. Okay.
I
For
remember now.
general permit
Thanks,
number
brother.
4, 12, or 14. Okay, great.
Yeah, and
Uh,
412s and 14s, you know, I tell staff here often, let's try to get them out the door as fast as possible. I know that doesn't always happen because there's sometimes some T&E issues out there that can slow things down because they're trying to review and make sure that any activity out there is not going to, you know, have any negative impact on a threatened or endangered species. So that's why sometimes they take longer than we would like. But to answer your question, they do not require LOIs. GPs, when you do a GP, you're supposed to delineate the wetlands that within the vicinity of the proposed activity. So it does not require an LOI. LOIs are nice and convenient, but you don't require them to get the permit. You will have to delineate the wetlands that again are in adjacent or you know the nexus of the proposed activity. So that way we can say, you know, hey, this looks about right. This disturbance amount looks about right. And you know many of them we just do via you know sort of desk auditing. If something doesn't look right, we do go out and field truth them. We spot check it to make sure. But it does not require an LOI. The only things that require LOIs are the different types of TAW waivers. There's several of them. You know, an averaging plan, a D clause, a straight reduction, a linear development, a redevelopment waiver. They all require LOIs. That's the only time an LOI is required. Now, I hear there's going to be a nuance change, which we very much like for the transition area redevelopment waiver. I think as what I heard was, and this is a good thing, and I think it'll help the public, that we're no longer requiring a full-blown verification LOI with a redevelopment waiver, but more a footprint of disturbance LOI. So it's going to be kind of treated like a GP because a redevelopment waiver, and this is the theory behind it, everybody. A typical averaging plan, you're looking at the whole system and there's rules and regs about where you can reduce and compensate. Remember, you can take trees, but you got to give trees. You can't take trees and give grass. It's got to be equal or better ecological value. And so that's why we want the whole LOI because we're assessing the whole system. And then also you're going to be deed restriction, the rest of it. That's going to go back, not just exceptional wets, intermediates as well. So when you get an averaging plan, you take a bite of the apple and everything else is going to be locked up afterwards. We're going to have you deed restrict the remaining TA and wetlands on the property. So, and further, way the rule reads is when you're reducing on one wetland, you're supposed to compensate on that same wetland. So we need to see what the whole deal's what's all going on out there, because some of these sites are gigantic. Not every site is 10 acres or 5 acres. Believe it or not, there's still a few 400 or 500 acre sites out there that may have, sometimes even have a sub watershed within the site. So wetlands may be draining to yet another, you know, to a different sub watershed. So we need to see those types of things. That's the logic behind having a full-blown LOI on an averaging plan. For a redevelopment waiver, it's focused. It's focused in on legally existing transition area that you want to redevelop. So what they did was in the change, they are allowing you to get a footprint. So you got sort of just you focus in right on the wetlands that are being impacted via the redevelopment waiver, almost like the way you look at a GP.
Thank you for that detailed response. I'd see a similar question from Mr. Raja Javed. He's asking, and you've answered some parts of it, but here's a question: wetlands definition, calculations, and then he's asking about area around the tributary. Could that be a wetland? I believe that's what he's asking. And then he has a question on: can we have construction on the wetlands? Do state has some compensation while converting the residential or commercial areas into a wetland? So I believe he's talking yeah.
Well, I guess let me take that in parts, Faraz. I'm gonna need your help to dissect some of that question.
All right. So I believe.
Well, the first part.
What is a wetland?
Okay, easy.
Let's go with
easy
that.
peasy. Three parameters. A wetland, it needs to have in a typical situation, in a normal situation, a natural situation, it has to have three current parameters: hydrology, hydric soils and hydrophytic vegetation. So you have to have evidence of hydrology, one primary or two secondary indicators. Indicators are water stained leaves, advantageous roots, moss lines on trees, soil, the cracking of a soil. You guys have all seen that where like in the drought conditions where it looks like tectonic plates in the soil because like it dried up. Like rills or flow patterns, things like that. We look for those are some hydrologic indicators off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Water in the hole, sulfuric odors, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Hydrophytic vegetation, hydrophytes, water lovers, facultative or wetter. You got fact plus, fact wet, obligate, etc. These are the percentages that these plant species exist in a wetland complex.
Yeah.
And then the last one's hydric soils.
Identifying wetlands. Yeah, identifying wetlands is a science, and you do need expertise in it, and that's what Chris is explaining it to you. And for your purposes, you will probably rely upon somebody, an expert, a consultant, who will be looking at and reviewing it for you, and then they would submit this application to the department. So then that's what Chris was hinting. Like there are many indications of hydrology, vegetation, soils that indicate wetlands in a given area. So I want to go forward with what he asked in terms of, can we have construction on the wetland? I guess, can we
that's a maybe, sir. It depends on. The answer is yes, maybe. Depends on what your proposed activity is. I really that's a question. I can't answer that question in a vacuum. If it's a proposed activity that meets the rules, then the answer is yes. If it does not, the answer is no. It really is that simple. I want to go back to the soils real quick though for Oz, because I want to make a point to everybody on the third parameter. Ladies and gentlemen, to me, soils are probably the most dependable and the biggest parameter of the three. Hydric soils are soils that exhibit characteristics of saturation and being in an anaerobic condition for the definitions is for at least 2 weeks in a row consistently of within that ecosystem, growing season of that particular ecosystem. And that's a broad definition because they're trying to talk about the wetlands all over the continental North America, which has a ton of different ecosystems. So that's why it's a broad brush definition. But hydric soils are probably your most dependable parameter. Once they turn hydric, which by the way, they turn hydric because of basically an oxidation reduction issue going on. I always forget. It gets reduced, so it gains electrons, and then so it coagulates the iron in the soil and creates what's known as redoxomorphic features or modeling. These little that's how you can tell water table. And wetlands just a water table at the surface. It's no different than determining water table at 16 feet when you're putting in a basin or putting in a septic system or trying to find groundwater. It's just groundwater at the surface is all it is. So it's a very dependable parameter of the three, because vegetation can be wonky and hydrology can be periodic, and sometimes you don't see much of it except for other indicators than the obvious hydrology after snow melts and rainy seasons. Then was there any more to that question? I know he asked about
So I think you answered the question, and
okay,
so I think it was a very general question, somewhat vague. Folks, the one thing that does help when we were looking at the question, if you are able to give more about the scenario that you're looking, are there wetlands? Can you build in wetlands? That's obviously a very general question. Depends on where, what, how much disturbance, how much impact. So all of these questions come into it. One thing that I do want to reiterate what Chris talked about is that the wetland rules are not there to take away property development or rights of an individual homeowner. The wetland rules are there so we protect the environment, we protect the wetlands, obviously, and go from there. Chris, you want to add anything to that?
Let me add to that. A couple things. Yeah, because listen, folks, the freshwater wetlands rules protect us. It protects our water quality, what we drink, what we put on our crops, what our children are drinking. It's not some sort of a bureaucratic rule out there to take people's property away from making a buck or two. It's really a well thought out rule that's stood the test of time since 1987. So that's the purpose of the rule. And I saw that somebody popped up about relic soils, a question on the hydric soil. Yeah, what happens is once a soil turns, it never turns back. And what I mean by that is there are times where a system will get its hydrology cut off for either man-made activities, which you're technically not supposed to be doing, but it happens, and sometimes natural. One of the best scenarios I always like to talk about, early in my career, I was up in North Jersey and I was in Morris County because that's what I was assigned my first several years here at the state. And I was on a site and I was in these people's backyards and I was getting mucky, like, a lot of like significant dark soil upper horizons. And then I was getting modeling and hydric soils. And I'm trying to understand why I had such strong hydric soils. Yet I was looking at these large, like 40, 50-year plus red oaks and large, tree species that were upland tree species. And, I just didn't understand what had happened there. And there really wasn't any hydrology left. I went back and did the homework. I looked at aerials. I looked at old soil surveys. I looked at, the history of the development. I found out that what it was an old lake bed that was drained in the 50s and they turned it into a housing community. So the soils there were hydric. They were relic hydric soils, but the hydrology was gone. The vegetation was gone. It was no longer a lake bed and no longer a wetland system. So that's what that's a classic scenario where a relic soil can throw you off.
Great. Thank you again for bringing it to the, how we understand why do we protect wetlands? Why are wetlands important? And obviously, hey, we're drinking that water. And if we pollute that water,
flood attenuation, habitat, carbon sequestration. That's, basically, sort of like managing the amount of base flow gets into the stream systems. So it's not too much. It's sort of with flood attenuation. 5 extremely ecological important reasons.
Yes. And as you and I know, we don't like our basements to be flooded. What do wetlands do? They act like sponge.
They attenuate blood. Absolutely do.
And they act like kidneys.
Flood storage in there.
Yep, and they purify clean water. This is what happens. And so there's a reason why wetlands are important, and we're trying to protect.
And I want to add to that, Faraz. When you have a wetland system, it does one of two things. When it goes through the wetland, either it drains down through the wetland complex into some sort of an aquifer and base flows out into a stream, or and we get our water from rivers or sometimes reservoirs, and many times down into aquifers. So these wetland systems, one way or the other, scrub the water out so we can drink it, because there's no other ways that you can access the water except for one of those three, processes. And the wetlands provide a vital function for all three scenarios.
Thank you again. Folks, who are listening here, I'm going to ask you a question. And so I'm sending it here in the chat. Please feel free to respond and let us know your preference. And so this is again for future webinars or future communication and outreach that we have with you. And the question is, what type of outreach or educational resources would you find most helpful for future wetland related or future land use or environmental related questions or projects? So what type of resources? And webinar, we are doing it, we'll obviously record it and we'll have it available. Is it YouTube videos? Is it like the newsletters? Is it stuff that's available online in terms of PDF format? You let us know and we'll try to make sure that we have these resources available for you to be able to understand and navigate through complex world of wetlands regulation. It is complex, yes, I do want to mention that. Okay, so with that one, we'll go to the next question. We're almost, we have about 15 more minutes. And I want to make sure that the questions that you submitted, these are the questions when you registered. We asked if you have any questions, and you shared your questions with us. So we're going through these questions. And the next one, let's see. This one you may have already answered, but I'm going to share this one with you, some parts of it. Jessica Pearson's asking, general concerns surrounding development that address more than 50-foot or greater than buffer area requirement. The general nature of wetlands and their important functions for the ecology, as well as stormwater management.
I mean,
And
we did sort of answer a lot of
we did
that
answer.
question,
Okay.
you know, but
Yeah.
but man, if we're outside of our jurisdiction, there's not much we can do. So on that front would be, you know, local environmental commissions and local township engineers. You know, if the townships can go above and beyond, it's the way it sort of works. And just like a state can go above and beyond federal law. Hence, you know, we have the Clean Water Act, and then we have the Freshwater Wetland, which is federal. Then we have the Freshwater Wetlands Protection Act rules, which is state, which takes the federal. Then we're here because we do more. We protect more. We have transition areas. We have, you know, specific, you know, many GPs are connected to nationwide permits. But the point is, you know, that's what the state federal relationship is. It's the same thing with the municipalities. If a municipality chooses to be a little more protective of their resources, they can put in, you know, ordinances for like protecting hydric soils, you know, amounts of disturbances, things like that. But to answer the question, anything outside of our jurisdiction would have to be a local level decision to do any further protections that are above and beyond the Freshwater Wetlands Protection Act rules.
So it's safe to say that in New Jersey, the bare minimum on wetlands is you know, regulated by the state, NJDEP, but the local government municipalities could actually beef up the environmental regulations.
via sub local ordinance. I've seen, again, hydric soil ordinances where you can't touch. They don't want you. They regulate that. People have tree ordinances where you can't cut down certain species or size or amount of trees in your town. So yeah, it comes down to local ordinance.
Okay. This one is next question, and Harriet is asking about what resources are available that may show wetland delineation on any particular land, for example, lot and block. Chris, you want to talk about the resources, the maps that we have available online?
I would love to. Would love to, because I want to beat up on GeoWeb. And I want to make this crystal clear to anybody out there that's listening to me. GeoWeb is not gospel. Do not bank on that mapping as an accurate depiction of what is out there on a property. It's just a tool to give you some generalities. It's based on LiDAR imaging, and it's not always correct. I've seen the scenarios where it looked like they got it right. I've seen scenarios where they had wetlands on there weren't any out there. I've seen scenarios where there was no wetlands shown on that mapping and there was out there. The only way to determine if there's wetlands on a property is to ground truth it, to field truth it, to put boots on the ground. So if you're a township official and you're reviewing somebody and they're like, oh, well, look, here's the GeoWeb that said DEP says there's no wetlands on my property. It does not mean that there's no wetlands there. And it also doesn't mean that there is. It's just a tool to say, hey, folks, look in these areas. It's potential. So I wanted to make that crystal clear. Now, what was the other part of that question for us? Because I wanted to answer another part of that. I had a thought on that.
Sure. So the question was about, again, determining wetlands and where to go with them. So one of the resources we talked about is the GeoWeb, and are there any other resources out there? And what does it mean when they see the wetland map? Does that mean, again, you've clarified, but does that mean something else? You know, NWSI's wetland maps and stuff.
It doesn't mean anything else. It just means there's potential there, and that hey, you might want to. It's a better chance you might want to take a look. Now, more often than not, it's accurate that they're out there. The configuration is almost never accurate, but more often than not, there probably are there. but it's something you need to take a look at. Now, as far as like, you can research our data miner on the website and via block, lot, township, and or I should say municipality and county. And if there's an actual LOI done on that property, you can have an accurate now depiction of what the wetland line is on the property, something you could that you could count on, because that person who has a valid LOI, that property owner is certainly legally counting on that. They're legally relying on it, is the term I always hear, reliance. Within reason, they have a basically it's a legal jurisdictional line in the sand that once an applicant receives that, they're spending money and making business decisions based on that. So that reliance is really important and strong. So if you have a property that you're interested in knowing whether or not it has wets on it, and you check it and has an existing valid LOI, that's gold. If it has one that just recently expired, it's probably pretty darn dependable. If you have one from like 1990, throw it out and start over.
Yes. So as I hear you, and just to reiterate what you mentioned, when folks are looking at it, any maps out there, any things that are not LOI that have been approved and are currently good standing, meaning they have not expired, anything other than the LOI, the document, and the associated
There's
map
no reliance on it.
There's no reliance. It's an unofficial. The only way to get wetlands to be identified on your property is really the wetland LOI, letter of interpretation, that is issued by the state as an application that we have.
And if you're a property owner that owns less than 1 acre of a site, which is the small ones, you can actually hire the department to go out and do the delineation for you, which saves you a few bucks. You won't have to pay necessarily for a consultant to do the work, but you still have to pay for a surveyor, because ultimately we would put the flags out there and you'd still have to get it surveyed, and then we would write it up. So just keep that in mind for anybody that might be a property owner of a property of 1 acre or less.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's go on to, if we have some questions about particulars from Wayne Corsi. They're asking if wetland transition area is maintained stone driveway. Again, if a wetland transition
Legally.
area is maintained stone driveway, can the property owner pave the driveway without any wetlands permit?
Yeah, the short answer is, in that scenario, if it's legally existing, yeah, you can. It's when you start, to resurface it or repave it, but also it depends on what surface it was. I mean, if it was impervious gravel, well, then we're not going to lose much sleep over. If it's just an old dirt road that's got switchgrass and other herbaceous things growing up in it that can perk, well, you will need a permit, because you're going to be increasing your impervious area and you'll likely need to deal with some stormwater. So sorry, I can't give you an absolute yes or no answer on that. It depends on the specifics of the site. But let's say it's an existing paved road, legally existing, and you want to resurface it and repave it and stay within the same footprint, we wouldn't regulate that. But if you're changing a dirt road that perks into a road that doesn't, you're likely going to require permitting.
Got it. Thank you, Chris, for just making sure that this is a new nuanced approach to answering these questions, and what is there legally, what is existing, and the difference between the two. There's a question related to from I believe Jerry O'Brien. Do regulated wetlands that have been approved show up on any mapping, or just within the permit application at the town, state?
Just within the permit application.
Okay. And so,
yeah.
And the related question
and the town
is,
should have a copy of it. The municipalities, the municipal clerk's supposed to be getting a copy of the final decision. We have a copy of the final decision. The applicant and agent gets a copy of the final decision. So those are where you would be able to find that information.
And Mike also is asking here something similar. He's asking about, is the GeoWeb mapping updated as the LOIs are completed by the department?
No, there's no correlation. So don't bank on that geomapping. Having said that, I believe the smarter people here that are younger and smarter than me are working on having the LOIs be, since you do the ELOIs with those shape files. If any of you guys are out there and think, oh, those ELOIs are a pain in the rump, they can be. But the beauty of them is we'll have that shape file. And then I think eventually there's going to be mapping put together where we're going to be using those shape files, which will be actual verified delineated wetland complexes that you could bank on looking at the mapping.
Yes.
But until that happens, there's no correlation between that yet. They are not sistered up.
Yes. So we do have several questions that are coming in as we are in the final 5 minutes. I see the desperation. I appreciate it. And what I want to say, folks, and I'm going to ask Chris again. Chris, if you could just type in the chat your contact or who should they contact, and keep your questions coming. We will most likely do another seminar or webinar in the near future, and we will include you in the information in the contact or communications over the email. So folks, we are here to respond to your questions, so we definitely will do that. Meanwhile, I do have Christopher Reed is asking, and I believe this is also pertinent. How does a municipality best guide potential purchasers of land to perform due diligence to avoid these purchases from appearing at a calling or the local building department or calling them a local building department asking what can I do with this property?
Easy peasy question for Oz, and I have this conversation with people almost on a daily basis. Do your due diligence. Tell them it's like hiring a roofer, hiring an electrician. Hire a smart consultant, have them put their boots on the ground, come out there and take a look to see what you have out there. Unfortunately, all consultants are not equal, and motivations are not equal. Having said that, there's nothing better than a good consultant, and they can give you some sort of, certainty or better feeling of certainty if they've been out there, he or she's been out on your site and says, hey, Mr. Khan, you have wetlands in the back, northwest corner of your property. My experience tells me it's probably going to be intermediate value. It's most of them are around here. You're likely going to have a 50-foot buffer. The property probably has some developable uplands up front, without any permits at all. Or, Mr. Khan, that whole site's loaded with wets. Don't buy it. Or, hey, Mr. Khan, you have wetlands on the property. The TA is encompassing some of it, but it's the way it's configured and the project you're proposing, we could probably get you a permit from the department to do that construction. So those are pretty much the three scenarios you'll hear from somebody like that. So if that question came from somebody that's working within a municipality, my recommendation would be to have them go out and I mean, they can do that from us. They can have us do presence absence determinations or footprint determinations. But really to have them go out and have a consultant that's worthy or that's trustworthy, and have them go out and take a look at the property and give them the scenario. I'm not telling you that a township should take that as gospel and run with it, but that'll at least give the property owner some sort of level of understanding what's on the property instead of going in there blind and buying a wetland that we can't approve something, and then they're all ticked off, dropping all kinds of money, and then that just ends up being a really bad scenario. So I would recommend getting boots on the ground to field truth or to field inspect these properties to give them a general.
Yes.
Yes.
So this was, I want to give shout out to Christopher Reed for asking that question from Lacey Township. So definitely, Township have a lot to cover. And you were really the first responders on these wetland rules, because folks generally reach out to you, and knowing the difference between, when to guide folks towards NJDEP, to if there's an application process, or to guide them that there's something local only. It's a really good idea to understand these rules really well, and it's specifically not just wetlands related, but also the buffers that are related. Folks tend to confuse these issues, that when they see wetlands, they say, oh, wetlands are over there, but you don't know the transition area or buffer that may be a 150-foot buffer there, and where they're developing or building or putting a fence may require a permit from the department.
Yeah,
So
that's
just wanted to mention
well
that.
said for us.
Mhm.
And municipalities, for if you're concerned, when people come in, say, listen, have the property owner get an LOI on the property, get a net presence absence, get a delineation, etc. And that way you have a legal line in the sand, and there's no uncertainty at all.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask the final question to you folks here who are listening and have been, very patient with us, as we were responding to your questions. I really appreciate it. There were no technical glitches for most part, so we were able to conduct this in a fair amount of time. And I really want to thank again Patty Cluelow, who's been here. Yeah, she's an expert. She's somebody we look up as an environmental coach at this point. Somebody who teaches, and right down to being involved in rule writing and policy making issues, and as well as Chris Squazzo, who's with us, fielding questions, going out there in the field, doing the work, just like how he started. He still goes out there in the field and delineates or verifies wetlands. The last question I have for folks for you is regarding this webinar. How helpful was this webinar today? And when would you like to have the next one in the future, or if you would like to have one in the future? So please do comment or do let us know in the chat. We will be saving this chat. I would also want you at this point to be able to copy some of the contact information or the website that you saw. Make sure you click on them so you have that available to you, on your website that you're looking for, whether it's the WLM or the data miner or the other, or even the contact information. So if you see contact information for Chris and Patty, Patricia, Cluelow, please make sure that you copy at this point so you don't lose that information. I want to give 1 last minute as it's beyond time now, 12:01, but I want to give 1 last minute to Chris again for any final comment or concluding remarks that you have.
I don't. Just thanks for everybody's time, and please give us any constructive criticisms that you may have, so we can make sure that this is something you folks want and need, and how we can, what we did right and what we didn't do right. And thank you, everybody. Thanks for putting this together, buddy.
Thank you again. And one last time again, we will have this recording available for you within a day or two. Hopefully, we'll put it up on the website. Again, DEP, you're going to look, if you're going to Google search, you're going to look into wetlands, watershed and land management. If possible, you remember this one. But if you look for Wetland 101 NJDEP, you should be able to find this recording of this video, which will be posted very soon. Okay, thank you, and have a good afternoon.
And a quick shout out to Kevin Slacha too, who was the computer and guru behind all this. Kevin, we couldn't have done it without you, pal.
Yes, indeed. Thank you again, folks. Have a good one.